Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rich, Simple Human. Today I'm sitting down with Octavian Graf Pilate and we have got a very interesting conversation for you. Before you do anything else today, please go away and make a note that you are going to follow Octavian on Substack because he writes incredibly well about all things heir education and more. And in the show notes below today, we're going to link a voucher code so you can subscribe to that Substack and get an awful lot of information about what we're talking about. Octavian speaks with great authority from this area, and he's going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. But today, we're going to cover heir education, neurodiversity in wealth transfer, inheritance, family governance, and leadership, and so much more. I hope that's whetted your appetite. And Octavian and I have had a number of conversations already, and this is going to unpack a huge amount of interesting facts. Octavian, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Before we start, can I just ask you to introduce yourself to the audience? And you are probably one of the most credible people I can talk to on the issue about wealth transfer. So if you could give us an intro about your experience and what you do, that would be great.
All right. So in respect to the whole wealth transfer discussion, what's probably important to say about me is I'm from an aristocratic family here in Austria. We've been stewarding wealth for about 800 years, but the family has been around for about 1,000 years. So the initial 200 years, we were a family of knights without land. And then we acquired some land through marriage. And from then it went upwards. And at the end, we were one of Austria's princely houses. So it's the family of Kiew-Müller-Metsch. I don't carry the surname any longer because my great-grandfather had 4 daughters. So we have had a couple of wealth transfers over the last few hundred years, some which went well and some which didn't go so well. And my own experience from taking over the estates in a crisis situation brought me into the sphere of family governance, let's say. I wondered what we did badly and what we could have done better and what we did well. And so here I'm now, not only just looking after my own wealth that comes from the family, but also consulting on family leadership and family governance.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And I have enjoyed reading your writings on Substack an enormous amount. And I know that our audience will really benefit from leaning into some of what you have got to say. Octavian, we're sitting down now because the great wealth transfer is rapidly approaching. And it's something I've talked about on the show a couple of times because it keeps coming up in conversation. We also know that a lot of that wealth is coming to women. So the landscape is changing. We also know that with AI appearing very, very rapidly, our entire world is changing and we are going to end up in a very large wealth gap, depending, of course, on what happens in terms of legislation moving forwards. And of course, we just don't know. But as we enter the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history, I'm really, really interested to know right off the bat, what are the biggest mistakes wealth creators make when preparing the next generation?
Well, probably not preparing them at all. I think that's the biggest mistake that I see. Not preparing them at all or starting way too late thinking about it.
When you say preparing too late, I am fortunate to work in a number of roles where I work with people who are both wealth creators and first and second generation inheritors. When do you think the preparation for inheritance should begin?
Well, immediately when the kid is born. That's when it starts. And that sounds, at the beginning when I say this, people are like, okay, how? When there's a baby. Children learn by watching you. So it begins by you showing them through your actions how to behave, how to be, how to deal with wealth, and so on and so forth. So that is how you do it at the beginning, and then later down the road, probably starting at the age of 6, you can have a bit more of intentionality to it, saying, okay, there's a few little exercises that you can do with kids, and there's a lot you can do, and you can do it at in an age appropriate way. A 10-year-old will understand the balance sheet if you explain it properly to them.
Absolutely. We're also entering a generation which is now cashless. So certainly when I was growing up, we had money in our wallets. We had a physical sense of what we were spending, saving, investing, or even borrowing. And we're now in the situation where a cashless generation has less financial literacy overall, depending on which statistics you read, than before. Octavian, that plays an enormous part in this conversation about preparation. Is there anything you'd say about that, the cashless situation we're now in?
Yeah, I think it is really important when you're younger so one of the things that sometimes is also missing in wealthy families is that the next generation is, I use the word pampered on purpose here, and they don't experience the same that the wealth creator experienced when they were young. So they don't go through a period where they have to work a little hard to make some money. And this starts with, little things like, okay, you mow the lawn and you get a penny or like a pound for mowing the lawn, which is not a lot, but it is, mowing the lawn is physically exerting. It's difficult. It is hard work. And by getting this pound in exchange for mowing the lawn, they learn. And you can do this with other household chores, or maybe asking the neighbor if they could do something for them, so they also learn doing it for other people. And it is a bit less. The lesson is a bit less, I think, by not this exchange happening in a physical way. But we are in a digital era, so doing it digitally will probably work just as fine down the road, I think.
Absolutely. I see some people manage their children's or support managing their children's financial education digitally very, very well. I also see some parents manage it quite badly with a lack of awareness and a lack of conversation. I love the fact that you said conversation can start straight away. Something I see a lot of wealth creators do, Octavian, is they almost deny the children, or they deny the existence of this inheritance that's coming. They almost play it down. And I know we're slightly off script now, but what would you say to parents who would say, and they often say to me, I don't want my children to be entitled. And I say, but they already are. It's a very strange situation. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, if you look at it from a psychological level, by you worrying so much about them not being entitled, that's the best recipe for them to become entitled in the first place. We call it, in psychology, it's called paradoxical intention. And secondly, they need to learn to handle wealth in a healthy manner. And by hiding the wealth from them, that's not a way to learn how to handle wealth in the first place. And it's not a way to learn to handle it in a healthy manner either. So the family wealth and the family legacy, that is part of you when as a person. And you need to integrate this properly into your identity as a person. And you don't do this if you're kept away from it, in a sense. Hiding it from the kids is usually a bad recipe. First of all, they kind of figure it out anyway. They're not stupid. And even if they don't, you then shock them completely later on. I mean, they will figure out that you're wealthy, but they won't figure out exactly how much. Although that is nowadays also becoming easier when with social media, with online research and so on. So I think the transparent and open approach is much, much better than anything else.
Yeah, I love that you've said that. And I think talking about money is a really controversial topic still, especially in Europe and the UK. And I've recently had some really challenging conversations about motivation. If your motivation isn't money, what is your motivation? And if your motivation is money, why is it still motivating you when you probably already have enough? And certainly if we look at some of the wealth barriers that are put, or the wealth levels that are put in place, most of us are doing very, very well when we're talking about these top tiers of leadership and high net worth. That doesn't mean we're happy, of course. That's a whole other conversation. But I'm really... totally different conversation, and we may or may not come onto it today. But I've got lots to ask you about the stewardship trap. And I wanted to specifically ask you to talk about the neurodiversity and the pressure versus creativity challenge when people are inheriting.
So, first of all, what is the stewardship trap? Some of the listeners might have heard of it before, many probably not. And it's been documented scientifically that stewardship is the concept of you stewarding the wealth for the next generation. So this is particularly interesting starting from the second generation onward, because you are handed over wealth that has been created, and it's the family wealth, it's not your personal wealth, and it is your responsibility while you are the principal or the patriarch or the matriarch to look after this responsibly for the next generation down the line, and so on and so forth. Now, this mindset can lead to the stewardship trap, where you are so pressured and so worried about making a mistake, and that you will engage in what is called defensive decision making. And defensive decision making means that you take the safer option and you take the decisions that you are able to explain, but they're usually not the good options that you get. And paradoxically, by entering this super, super risk-averse mindset, there's only one direction this will go, and that is the wealth will be decreasing with every generation. And that's the stewardship trap, that you're actually getting the opposite of what you're trying to achieve due to just putting too much pressure on yourself and the heirs with this mindset.
Can I then ask you about the challenge in the stewardship trap of neurodiversity and lack of creativity?
Yes. So why is neurodiversity such an important topic when we're talking about wealth? And this is all still pretty new. So it's developing rapidly. And where do you find the most neurodiverse people in society? On the fringes of society. So give you an example. 80% of juvenile criminals in the US have ADHD. And at the same time, we know that in entrepreneurs, ADHD is 10 times more likely than it is in the wider population. And then you have autism, you have dyslexia, you have borderline narcissism. And for nearly all of these, it is about the same ratio, that it is 10 times more likely in entrepreneurs than it is in the wider population. This is probably due to neurodiverse people not fitting into corporate settings. It's very difficult for them to retain a job in a corporate setting. So it's funny how these numbers often are the same, but 80% of autists are unemployed, for example, because they're incredibly good at what they do, but they just don't fit into the neurotypical view of how you're supposed to be working and how you're supposed to be working in a team. The autists are very bad at working in teams. But if you give them a task, and it's something that they're interested in, and you let them sit alone in their room, they will do incredible work. But that's not how our companies work. But if you're an entrepreneur, you can do whatever you want, however you want. Now, neurodiversity mostly is genetic. There is different opinions around it, but we would say that about 80% of ADHD, autism, or whatever has genetic components, and 20% is the environment that you grew up in. So your environment doesn't decide if you have it, the environment decides how badly or how strongly it manifests in you. When we add this up, the likelihood of neurodiversity in wealthy families is very high. And a stewardship mindset is more of an administrative mindset. You administer the wealth. And that is something that people with neurodiversity are not very good at. They're usually very creative people that are more prone for entrepreneurship. So if your heirs have neurodiversity and you're trying to train them to become good stewards, which is managing the wealth, which is very executive function heavy, you're setting them up for failure, because they will not perform well at this, because they're just not made to work this way.
That is fascinating data. And of course, we've known for a long time that there are far more creative and neurodiverse entrepreneurs than not. We've always seen that in the statistics. But if we followed that back into elite education, for example, or into wealth inheritors, we're talking about a much higher percentage especially if we take into account the inherited factors, a much higher percentage of people sitting in that bracket. Is that right?
Yes. I
And
don't have the numbers off the top of my head right now, but I think alone there's about 30% of entrepreneurs have ADHD. That's a number I remember. And that's just one component of neurodiversity.
Yes, I've read many similar statistics, and it is quite remarkable. So when we're talking about preparing heirs, this is absolutely crucial. That brings us into the next conversation about ownership versus leadership. And you touched a little bit on the difference, and also whether generations should be handing down businesses or selling them on. And of course, the jury's out. There's some great thinkers out there that do propose that the best way to transfer wealth is through a sale and the distribution of funds for the next generation's own choosing. Octavian, can you talk a little bit to that? Because I think anybody listening who's a wealth creator and is in this preservation mindset is trying to manage from beyond the grave, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that is usually a strategy that is prone to fail. I always tell people, who is best equipped to destroy your legacy? It's your own kids, if they want to. And by you being so focused on your legacy, it's probably what you're going to be getting at the end of the day. Unhappy kids are not a good legacy to have. But the other end is, paradoxically, quickly going back to the stewardship trap, because it fits here quickly as well, is the best way to preserve wealth is actually by creating more wealth. So entrepreneurship is the answer, because also if you think about it from a mathematical standpoint, with every generation, usually the family members number increases. And if you want to keep the wealth per capita the same, you need to create more wealth. Otherwise, this is going to, the numbers very quickly will put the family back where it started. From a wealth perspective, that is. I think I lost myself a little bit. Can you repeat the question that I'm?
Yeah, of course. And this is a complicated question, because I've also, as you're talking, I've got even more things I want to ask you about. We're talking here about some of the theorists who say if you're transitioning wealth, the best thing to do is to sell up and hand on the cash.
Yeah. There's Tom Deeds, for example, is a proponent of this, and it is an interesting strategy. So there is some ups. Nothing is ever inherently good or bad. There's two sides to the coin, always. And, if you're handing over a lot of cash to people, it's always tricky. When you this is a very big life change, you're then very prone to making stupid decisions. People will when there's a company sale, everybody knows, so there's going to be a lot of, con men coming your way trying to get some of the pieces of the pie. And so that is the downside of the sale, is that you put the inheritor into a tricky situation where they have to deal with a lot of money and they need to reinvest. So the better it is if you can get the heir to have some entrepreneurial activity prior to that, because then, they're probably pretty clear where they want to invest their money. They might put it into their own business. They might have some experience already. So whether you sell the business or not, you need to train the next generation not only how to handle wealth and how to handle money, but also how to be entrepreneurial, how to lead a business, how to be a good shareholder. If they end up taking leadership in the business or not, is the second question. But you first have to try and teach them what good leadership looks like. They need to try and have a little go at that somewhere, be it at their own business, or maybe be it in sports, trying to be captain of their football team or whatever. They need to taste leadership and understand how difficult it is before they make the decision of should they take on a leadership role in the business or not. And it's the same with being a shareholder. Being a good, responsible shareholder is very different to being a disengaged shareholder. And there's a lot of family businesses who struggle after a few generations that most of the shareholders are disengaged, and it becomes really difficult to make big decisions because they don't care. And these are the type of things that you need to work towards and see, okay, how can we make sure that our family doesn't end up that way? And then I think an open conversation in the family is always important. Like sometimes the heirs don't want you to sell the business because they like it. They want to take over. They want to do the next thing. Sometimes they are like, please sell. We really don't want to be producing socks. Fair enough. And sometimes they're split, and you need to find a way around that. So one thing that will for sure end in your heirs being very disappointed is if you just make a decision without engaging them first and then tell them, I've got something important to tell you, I sold the business. That can go very badly on an emotional level.
Yeah, and I love the way you've spoken to the vulnerability of that. A lot of the work that I do is in addiction and in ultra high net worth addiction. And of course, when a sale is made, like you say, it's incredibly public, and it does create another level of vulnerability to those family members who with social media are easily identifiable, and which is where the importance, of course, of security consultation comes in. That's another podcast, definitely,
Yes.
for another time. Can I ask you a bit more about the Thomas Dean thinking of continuing or selling? Because I've seen one of the global leading international schools execute a very interesting creative entrepreneurial scheme where students were engaged in projects around coffee production, wine, and honey. And this, to me, from the outside looking in, looked like an incredible way of training students in an elite educational setting to do exactly what you've just said, become creative entrepreneurs with the backing of their own family wealth and really create something new and unique that meets their needs, especially if they are of a neurodiverse or entrepreneurial mindset rather than of a stewardship discipline. What do you really, really think about this being done at that level?
I think that's incredibly good. So I myself have ADHD and autism, and in my case, I didn't really. I took over the estates in a crisis, which was kind of like very exciting and engaging, but I didn't really get the chance to start my own thing, which I would have loved to do. And I think starting that at a school level is really great because what do you have to lose when you're in your teenage years? Especially, and that's the thing, a teenager, and that's also the that goes into the whole how do you best hand over wealth to the next generation. If you give a teenager 20,000 euros and say start a business, for them it is a huge amount of money and they can do lots with it. Do it with a 50-year-old and they're like, oh, this is nice. But a teenager, they're like, this gives them a chance. It puts them under a little bit of pressure, but not too much. 20,000 is a lot, but it's not that much. And they can try something with it. And if they fail, who cares? Like, they made an experience. They get to try it. If you go down the line further with a 10-year-old, they can try something out with 5,000 euros. For them, it's a lot of money. For the family, it is literally nothing if they're wealthy. But it is a huge experience for the heir growing up. And so that is like, comes with a gradual handover of wealth, gradually handing over wealth. And with this gradual handover of wealth, you also hand over a little bit of power and responsibility, always in an age-appropriate, size. And that's how you can get them slowly to the level where they need to be when they're in their 40s, for example.
I love the way that you've just explained that. And I think it's important just to remember that we are talking about this ultra high net worth where that kind of money can be used, as you say, as an experience, as a training ground for much, much greater volumes of wealth that are coming. The reason that I spend so much time talking about this, Octavian, is because the method that I use of sophrology is very, very much focused on vision and future, as well as staying in the present and also understanding the past. But we ask clients a lot to talk about their vision. We do a lot of future visualization. We do it with a lot of chief execs, high net worth leaders. This legacy piece and the purpose piece comes up again and again and again. And it always astounds me when I ask people, what does their life look like at 65 or 70? They can't really tell me. They're brilliant right here, right now. But that future vision is not without anxiety, but it's about articulating, okay, this is what my legacy would look like. If my foundation was the Lindsay Francis Foundation, this is what it would be doing. These are the areas that I'm really, really engaged in the world. And when we start thinking like that and we realize the power we've got, of course, we can communicate that to the generations beneath us. And it becomes a much more fruitful, meaty, exciting conversation when we lead by example. And that's what you said to begin with. How many people do you see being able to do that in this space?
It's a difficult question. You get a few people who have very clear ideas, but a lot, similar with them not having a vision exactly when they're 60, 70, there isn't really a succession plan either, or a plan of how to hand over the wealth. Many don't even have a will in place yet. So there is a little bit of this anxiety of the future and of one's own death and in such as such. There's actually an exercise which I really like, and I didn't invent it, but it is where you sit down and you imagine your own funeral and you write down the people that are there. You write down what people say about you, what the whole setting of the funeral is. And from this, you can kind of like infer what you want to do in your whole life and who you want to be and so on and so forth. And by doing this exercise, people also become a bit more open to writing a will because they've just gone through their funeral mentally.
I love that you've said that before I did, because fear of death, I think, is a big subconscious driver for not doing this work. And I think the more we're all dying, that's a given. Some of us are dying quicker than others, of course. And the obsession with longevity and biohacking that's out there, especially if you are in that billionaire category, you may have every piece of kit currently known to man sitting in your mansion and you're using it because you want to extend your lifespan. So why are we not talking about what happens afterwards and what I really want to be going on when I'm dead? And of course, that's not a nice conversation to have. But if you can ease people into that space, they begin to meditate on, actually, how wonderful could this be? Because look at what I've created with my life and look at what I've left behind. I really think that writing your own writing your own funeral scene, Octavian, is a great one. But you do need to know the client very well. And there needs to be a very high level of trust, of course, before we do this. I also think it's a great starter in intergenerational workshop settings because it does allow the leaders to articulate what they were thinking. And it also allows the second and the third generation to ask questions about, well, what happened before we had all this money? And that's another great conversation. I'm sure you've seen that happen a lot.
Yes.
The stories of before this happened, this is where we lived, retracing our ancestral roots.
I mean, if you're like, if there's the conversation between first and second generation is very different than, once they're third or fourth generation, because second generation, they still experience the roots often. So they have, and that training. So, because we're talking about preparing the heirs, second generation kind of like has a really bad position because when they were young, there wasn't any wealth yet often. And the parents weren't at home a lot because they were building the wealth. So there's a lot of stuff is missing due just to, how do you train them for wealth when you don't have one? You don't really think that way. You're busy building wealth and then, but you weren't there when I was a kid, and then they're not prepared for the wealth when they're in their 20s. That's a very different situation than if you're looking at third generation onwards, where there is the chance to train them for wealth and so on and so forth. I'm in generation 30 or something, so I really feel for people in the second generation because it's not an easy position to be in.
No, it's not. And I think the pressure, there's a subconscious anxiety that's handed down by the wealth creator because the wealth creator has lived in both spaces. They've lived in scarcity and now they're living in abundance. But of course, they're subconsciously creating that concern about scarcity in their own children. You must work, you must work. And I think for those children looking back, they're thinking, what? Sorry, what? I haven't suffered any hardship. The hardship was actually yours. And it becomes very complicated.
Just imagine you're the kid of someone who made $1 billion themselves. That's a very big yardstick, very big shoes that potentially need filling, or that you think need filling. And a lot of people in that position now, that they kind of give up before even trying, because the expectation is so big. Well, if you grow up in a family which has nothing, there isn't a lot of expectation of you, often, which is the upside there. Not now saying, oh, poor rich kids, that's not what I'm trying to get across, but it's just the challenge is a different one. And that is often not addressed, because also in society, it is not seen as a challenge. You're not allowed to articulate, oh, I don't know what to do because we have too much money. I'm worried about this. Will I be able to perform according to expectations? And this amount of pressure that they feel makes a lot of heirs crumble, mentally at least.
Yeah, it does. And I think I agree with you totally. It's not being talked about enough. And there is this sort of, oh, poor you've got so much. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about adequately preparing those global change makers, actually, who can become incredibly active and very, very supportive to other communities and multiples of people that they then employ, that they're working with, and that they are leading. So this servant-hearted, ultra-high net worth leadership is a crucial conversation, but one that is not being had around the table enough. The conversation I do see being had a lot, of course, is the governance, the structuring, the tax, and the nuts and bolts. But what you and I are talking about is what somebody said to me recently they call pre-governance: the communication, the vision, the gifts and talents, the abilities and the capabilities of those upcoming next gen, aligned with a vision and a mission of their own and from the generations before, which creates this kind of fresh start, if you like.
Well, when it comes to governance, as you explained, traditional governance is a top-down approach. A lawyer sits down with the patriarch or the matriarch, and they make some structures and they decide some rules. And now you then try and fit your next generation into pre-decided boxes, kind of, if you try and put it this way. And if we go back to our initial discussion about neurodivergence being very dominant in wealthy families, good luck with making your heirs fit into those boxes. That's you're setting yourself up for failure there. And I see a lot of families that agree on a family constitution, and then you have put a lot of money and time into this, and then great, you put it in a drawer and no one ever looks at it again. Or you do structures, and then for certain reasons and 30 years down the road, you're like, oh my God, why did we set this up? It's a big headache because it's for the wrong reasons. So pre-governance is enormously important because it's a bottom-up approach. So if a family approaches me and says, okay, we want to put some governance in place, what are best practices, etc., there is no best practice because it depends on what you have. It depends on the characters, the talents, all the things that you mentioned. It depends on, do I have an operational business? If yes, in which country? If what industry? How much wealth do we have here and there? What is it that we want to achieve? All these questions need to be addressed and answered and worked on first, and then you might be able to put a structure in place that, is sufficient for these.
I see exactly what you've said. I see the dossier that is the family vision, or the document that is the mission, but it's done independently of the capacities, the characters and the capabilities that currently exist in the family. So without that, that's a bit like me going out to market with an org chart and recruiting openly when actually I'm restricted to the pool. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And traditional governance comes very much from the mindset that, okay, I need to put something in place to protect the wealth from the family. All right?
Yes.
But the family is a resource, every family member is an asset that you have. And often when you look at family businesses or at wealthy families, why are they so successful is because of the family. This can deteriorate down the road, of course, but I rather get families into the mindset and say, okay, the secret source of our success is the family. What do we want to have how do we want to put our governance in place so we can leverage the family resources, the skills, the talents that are there and not restrict them?
I love the word special sauce, and this isn't a show about AI, but of course, this is what makes us human and not AI. And in family office, when we see what the special sauce is, i.e., the bit that can't be replicated or done by anybody else, that's the essence of the purpose. And when we can leverage that, which we do when we do consciousness work, obviously individuals, that's where we really drive change and also success. So I love that, Octavian. Maybe we could see a Substack on the special sauce at some point, because that is the key.
Yeah, I'll add it to my list of topics.
I love it. The next question I want to ask you about is what happens when the next generation doesn't want the business? And something that I see happen is heirs being educated abroad, exposed to totally different lifestyles from those that they've come from, seeing opportunities that are vastly different from the expectations from home. And then, of course, not really wanting to engage in what was built by the generation before them. What happens then?
Oh, that is, you see it a lot now with people from Asia being sent to the US or also from the Middle East, where also there's a culture clash then. I went to boarding school in the UK and we had that a little. It must be even worse. So Austrian and British culture is different, but not as different as Asian to American culture. That's like a total culture clash there. And, it happens. Sometimes the next generation is not interested in the business and the industry that you have put in place. However, I think this problem arises because the preparation hasn't been done properly. Now, let me try and explain. In families where the heirs get exposure early to the family business, you have them do internships, you have them do training in the business. I'm a big fan of saying, okay, your heir must have worked in every division that you have in your business as a trainee. I know some families, if they have a big company and the young heirs are kind of like not known very well, they both have them work in a company with a fake name so no one knows that they're an heir. Things like that are done. They will, the other things that they are exposed to, if they have been in touch with the business, they will come back with a mindset, okay, I've got all these ideas how we can change things for the better in the business. Well, if you shield them from the business, they will want to do their own things. And having them exposed to the business is not a guarantee that they come back and they want to do it. Exposing them to the business is really important for them to figure out, do I want to do anything in the business or not? Sometimes they will come back when they're 40 after having done their own thing and say, now I want to be and do something in the business. Some families even encourage that or make it a rule that they say you're not allowed to work in the business before you're 40 and you must have done this and this beforehand. So again, there's a lot of ways. You say every road leads to Rome. There's different ways of doing it. And it is interesting. Like I've been back to my alma mater in the UK to hold a career lecture a few years ago. And the idea was to talk to the kids, 17 years old, about do they want to join the family business or not? Because their parents are expecting them to choose studies that reflect what the family business is doing. So about half the kids had a family business in the background. And when you ask them, okay, who is planning to join the family business, they will put their hands up. Now, my second question was to them, who here knows what their family business actually does? One person had their hand up. Now, you have these kids who are being pressured to go into the family business and who are thinking about it, but they don't even know what it actually does. And they're picking their university degree based upon this. It's
They're
just mad.
remarkable statistics. It's crazy, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
we do know that when we are in a private educational setting, which is costing more money, of course, there are a larger number of children coming from families with a family business. But as you've just said, 50% of the children you were talking to came from families with a family business, but only one seemed to know what the family business was actually doing. So how do they then align their own gifts and talents, characters and capacities with the demands that will be coming later down the line? That doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
No.
This segues very nicely into a conversation about Gen Z. We have got a very, very different mindset in Gen Z than we had before. And this, of course, is for multiple reasons. We've been through COVID. We've now got deep political, socioeconomic unrest. And we've also got a huge change in technology. Gen Z have got a very different mindset and they're quite challenging. In fact, I think I read a statistic the other day that 40% of high net worth Gen Zs plan to get rid of their family office advisors and start again when they become the inheritors. If that is making people turn into a cold sweat now because of the fear, and if you're a wealth manager, listen up, what do you think, Octavian, of this younger generation coming up, wanting purpose and information, and they want to be heard?
Actually, people always say, I think they're not so much different to the generations beforehand in that sense, because, and I have experienced it. If the wealth advisor, the tax advisor, the family lawyer never engages with you as well and only with the patriarch, you're like, I'll get my own people in when I'm in charge, because they don't build trust with you. Now, advisors, we're talking about preparing heir. If you're an advisor to a wealthy family, you have an amazing chance to actually approach the patriarch and say, okay, how may I help in preparing your heirs? If you are the wealth advisor, you can teach them about stocks and bonds and how to invest, and you can set up a little portfolio for them where they can play around with. My dad made me do my first stock investments age 11. I got 10,000 euros. That's what I was talking about before. I got 10,000 euros and they were loan, so I wasn't a present. I had to pay 1% interest on them. So I learned as well debt and interest rates and so on and so forth. And so if you're an advisor, you can actively approach the family and do this. Are you going to make a lot of money by doing this? No, you're not. But you're going to build trust between the next generation and you're making sure you train them properly, and they're probably more likely to stay on with you. Or you can do events where you engage with the next generation in some sort or capacity, be it esports, for example, or whatever. Yeah, there's ways of doing this, but a lot of advisors are just so focused on the person who's in charge that they forget think about what's happening next. And I see a shift. More advisors are worried about this, and they're thinking about it probably because statistics are being thrown at them, like you just mentioned, and they're all getting worried. And understandably, and for the right reason.
I think they should be worried. And somebody said to me yesterday, don't worry, Lindsay, I talk teenage. And I thought, oh, that's amazing, because I don't. If you are a wealth advisor, maybe you need to learn to talk teenage, or at least you need to learn to talk Gen Z, because then you can meet them where they're at, rather than looking like you're so out of touch that they don't actually want to listen to you.
Well,
in the
you
first
want
place.
that the Gen Z thinks that you're rad. And if you don't know what that means, you are in trouble.
I must say, as a parent of teenagers, they are never going to think I'm cool. So I'm now being deeply uncool and just cutting my own groove, which is much more pleasurable for me. Octavian, this is where people like you and I come in, and we've got very different styles, we've got very different personalities, different experiences, and of course, very different backgrounds. But when you do build a relationship in a family office, it's about communication, it's about alignment of values and vision, and it's about meeting them as an advisor, but with a deep understanding. Tell me about some of the work that you do and some of the things that you most enjoy doing.
So there's two different things that I do in my work. One is one is one-on-one work with heirs, where I'm supposed to help one heir prepare them for the wealth. That is one type of mandate that I would be doing. And the other mandate is work with the whole family on essentially trying to make the family anti-fragile. That is my purpose in that work. And that is, what does anti-fragile mean in that case? It means you want the family to be in a position that when they experience any sort of shock, they go through the shock and they get stronger coming out of it. That is the next step up from resilience. And resilience, you just come back out at the same that you went in. And families, that's my theory at least, families that are around for a long time and for many, many generations, they figure out the art of being anti-fragile as a family. So that's what we set up. We try and work on the family as a whole, in all the 5 family capitals, and to try and set them up with a good foundation to endure whatever may come their way.
I love the way you've explained that, because the support is important, and it's also very bespoke, but it is out there, but I don't think there's enough of it. The great wealth transfer is a huge, huge challenge approaching, and it is affecting many, many families. We haven't got time today to talk about women in this role, and I'd love to dig more into the patriarch and matriarch, but I wonder if we might do that another time. So listen out for another episode of Octavian and I unpacking this. But before we close today's interview, Octavian, can you just say a little bit more about where to find you and also what people might do if they've got questions or want to work with you?
Yeah, so I've got my own webpage. If you put my name into Google search, you will find me. There isn't that many with my name. I think I'm the only one. And then you will find me on LinkedIn and Substack. And feel free to send me a LinkedIn message, send me an email, or use my contact form anytime.
Amazing. Well, I can't recommend your services enough, especially when it is that one-to-one mentoring and coaching. I work both one-to-one and in groups, but you and I are both very, very keen to help people see that vision, to understand their own personality types, and of course, the neurodiversity piece, and how that can really be leveraged for future wealth transition and family success. Until next time, Octavian, is there anything else we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with people today?
Oh, there's so much, in a sense.
There is.
There is. That's the problem always when I get this question. If there's anything else that I haven't shared, well, I can just say, look, on LinkedIn and on Substack, I regularly share my thinking. Just if you want to find something that I haven't talked about today, you'll find it there.
Amazing. And they will also find so much more information. One of the biggest challenges I find is that people don't even recognize this is coming. So wealth creators who haven't really realized that they've got some heir preparation to do, but also heirs that haven't realized they're actually heirs. What a strange and mysterious world we live in.
Oh, it's often the case. Humans are often very bad at self-awareness. It's like there's an exercise I have families do, which is an interesting one. Everybody writes down their biggest, 6 strengths and 6 weaknesses for themselves. Then you put it to the side, and then you do the same for every family member. And I tell you, sure as not, you will have something or 2 things on your strengths that everybody else puts down as a weakness for you, and the other way around.
It's fascinating work. I am a self-awareness addict. I love
Likewise.
using those words. There's nothing wrong with us. We can just be more self-aware and leverage what we've already got. So we're going to sit from that place of being perfect. Octavian, you are perfect just as you are. So am I. We just need to be more self-aware of our strengths and our weaknesses. Yeah. And of course, every weakness is also a strength, and every strength is also a weakness. It's absolutely crucial to the success of Family Office. I really look forward to talking to you again. Until next time, please, please, please make sure you go to my website and subscribe to the newsletter and the updates. You will also receive toolkits that we talk about and frameworks that we have referenced. Please, please go to Substack, use the code, join Octavian's newsletter, because you will learn so, so much. If you work in this field, if you live in this field, or if you're about to become an heir yourself, please, please, please prepare yourself, because you are perfect just as you are. You just need to be more self-aware.